Snow sifted through the high wounds of the roof and fell like ash on his hair, melting where it touched his skin, leaving tiny wet stamps that marked him alive. He had not felt the warmth of her breath go out, not exactly, because in those last stunned heartbeats after the knife slid home, there had been too much silence in him to feel anything. Her blood had run hot over his fingers, a narrow river finding every line of his palm, and the smell of it, salt and iron and smoke, had braided itself with the stink of charred stone and burned flesh and the thousand secret odors of a sacked city until there was no scent left to call pure. He held her through the stillness that followed, held her so gently that if gentleness were a prayer it might have brought her back. But the prayer softened into a whisper that had no words and then into breath that carried nothing. And then the breath had to stop, because even a man who had ridden through winter and outlived it must breathe. He laid her down where the veins of light lapped against the ruined floor like pale fish rising through a black pond. The hall groaned. Wind moved where windows had once held and tugged the charred banners until they sounded like ravens muttering in their sleep. His knife lay a little way off, not far, but he did not look at it. He looked at her, at the stillness that had been a storm, at lashes he had watched beaded with frost and tears, at a mouth that had taught him new names for longing and fear, and he thought, for a time that might have lasted a lifetime, that he should lie down and die too. A sound like a mountain cracking cut the world. He turned. There was a darkness moving down the length of the hall, and in it sparks like fireflies. The breath of it was a furnace waking. Nails in the stone shrieked as they bent. And then the darkness drew itself in, and the head that came to rest before him was vast enough to make every piece of him feel small again, like the boy who had looked up at an executioner and learned the lesson of steel. Amber eyes old as winter, the dragon's nostrils flared. The heat of that breath pushed his hair back from his forehead and made his eyes stream. It smelled her blood because how could it not? It smelled the knife and the ash and the wild beat of his heart, and it drew in that scent and rumbled low in its chest, a noise that threaded fear into every hole in the stone. He stood. He stood because there was nothing else left to do. His knees wanted to forget him, but he told them no. He told everything in him no except the part that understood he was finally alone. Alone with a creature that could make an end of him without effort and might. He stepped between the dragon and the body. Maybe that was honor or habit or madness. He did not ask and did not answer. The dragon's mouth opened. Heat rolled, a wave without water. He saw his own reflection in the wet dark of its throat. He said her name. He said it once, like a promise he could not keep and did not deserve, and he said, "I'm sorry," and reached out his empty hands. The dragon lowered its head until one eye filled his world. He had thought fire was only heat and light, but up close it had a sound, a whisper like 100 leaves burning, like fat hissing in a pan, like snow sliding off a roof. The dragon looked past him then, not at him at all, but at the thing that had been the heart of 1,000 shadows. The chairs welded into ugly pride and twisted into a symbol a boy had once imagined as a shining story. The dragon breathed, and the chairs of dead men collapsed into a river of light so bright his eyes had to close against it. The stone popped and cracked. Heat bent the air. The iron softened into a puddle that crawled like a living thing. When the last of the metal sighed and lay down like a beast that has learned, too late, it was tamed, the dragon took her in its claws, careful beyond belief, and rose in a rush that sucked the air out of the hall. Snow whirled down into the vacuum of it, and ash. He stood with his hair blown back and his heart in his mouth and watched the black shape disappear into the white day beyond the ruin. He was alone. No footsteps yet. No shouts. The city breathed like something dying and stubborn. He knelt because he had to kneel for a moment or he would fall. He pressed both hands into the warm stone where the iron had run and pulled them away with skin pink and tingling but not burned. And then he pressed his palms together and wiped them on his jerkin, leaving streaks like old blood on darker cloth. He rose. There was a narrowness in him that had not been there before, and if a man could step into a winter stream and have it carve him into a different shape, that was what the thought felt like. He tasted copper and smoke and the faint sweetness of a memory that had no home anymore. He went to the door. A corridor of black and red ruin led out into halls that had once been smaller for the weight of them. He walked and did not hide the blood on his clothes. When he met two Unsullied, they barred his way with spears and failed to blink as men blinked. Their commander was not among them, and perhaps that saved his life and theirs in that moment. He said, without slowing, "The queen has left the city on her dragon. She charged me to hold it in her absence." They didn't move. Their eyes did not read faces so much as orders, and he had given one. Orders could fit into their minds even when faces could not. One of them, a scar along the jaw that puckered the skin pale, glanced past him, smelling what the dragon had smelled. The other flicked his gaze toward the light. There was no throne to pull him like a lodestone. There was only ruin. "Take me to the commander," he said. They led him through black smoke and white dust and the murmur of a city learning how to grieve. Grey Worm waited in a courtyard scorched into glassy black, the oval of a FO. Untaine held a pool of water that had turned to sludge and then cracked. He stood with his sword bare as if a sword could solve what had happened to the world. When he saw Jon, the muscles of his jaw stammered once and went still again. The Unsullied formed a square around them with practiced calm, so even their breath belonged to a pattern. Jon stopped just outside the edge of that square. He felt the eyes of 100 men pinch at him like sleet. He lifted his voice. "She has left us a charge. Hold the city. Hold order. Do not kill for rage, only for peace. We have killed enough." There was a tiny movement at the corner of Grey Worm's eye. It might have been a flinch or a shard of ash. "Where?" he asked, in a voice that came from a long distance and did not believe in distances anymore. "East," Jon said, because a direction steadies a man even when it is a lie, and because east held the sea and the past, and because the truth had flown out a hole in the sky and would not help him or anyone else. "She will return when the city can bear to see her." He saw the thought move through Grey Worm. The commander's fingers tightened on his sword. It was not grief that sharpened him now but discipline, and discipline hung men as easily as it saved them. "If she returns," Grey Worm said. "When?" Jon did not blink. "Hold your men. Feed the people. The fires must be killed. The dead must be buried. There will be a council of what remains, and we will end this. You have my word." "Your word," Grey Worm said, and there was a slit cut into that phrase wide enough for rage to injure itself inside. "You would give me your word. I fought for her. I bled for her. I bled with you." He let that sit. "You are not butcher boys. You are soldiers. Be that." Grey Worm's mouth belonged to stone and did not move, and then it moved. A nod like a blade dipping in water. "Hold the city," he said, to the square of men, as if Jon had not spoken. "Kill looters. Kill rapers. Kill those who resist." "Grey Worm," Jon said, and walked forward into the press of spears. The points pricked his ribs and chest with the cold interest of predators. He kept walking. No burning. No crowds cut down. Not anymore. "What would you have me do with the men who killed my queen?" Grey Worm asked, and there was a new shape in his voice then. It did not ask about men. It asked about him. A silence like the breath before a hammer falls. He swallowed because there are some things a throat cannot hold and live. He let his hands move out from his body, palms turned like a priest's. "Hold them. There will be judgment." "By whom?" Mockery came very soft from that steady mouth. "By me," Jon said. The words changed the shape of the day, as if he had pushed his fingers into dough. He watched Grey Worm feel the bend of it. The commander's eyes were a night without stars. He could have said, "By the queen who left you her order," but he did not. He could have said, "By justice," but justice was too thin to feed anyone. He said the only thing left to say. "By me," he repeated. Grey Worm lowered his sword the weight of a breath. "Then give the order," he said. Jon turned. The city was cracked and would shatter further if someone did not hold it like glass and lead pressed into a pattern. He felt the cold narrowness in him press harder, aligning bone and thought. He thought of the old bear and of Robb with his hair uncombed and of Maester Aemon talking of love as the death of duty, and the words rose out of some other place in him where they had always waited, and when he heard them he knew he had already chosen. "Ring the bells," he said. "For mourning, not surrender. Gather the lords who live, commanders, captains, anyone who can stand upright and claim men will obey them. We meet at the dragon pit at first light." Grey worms stared at him as if he were reading a language he had forgotten. Then the commander saluted, a tight turn of the wrist, and the square dissolved into action. The bells began. He could have gone to the cells then, could have found the dwarf staring at a wall, could have spoken the truth he carried like hot iron under his shirt. Instead, he walked down into the city and let the bells fall around him like a rain of iron tears. He tore boards away with his bare hands where men trapped by fallen beams cried for help and could not crawl. He lifted stones until his back remembered it was young once. He pressed a palm to a folded old woman's powdered brow and told her to drink and held the cup for her when her hands shook too much. He pulled a child from a heap of rubble and found a cat snarl hissing beside her and took both. He saw Davos on a street corner organizing a line of men to pass buckets in a chain. The old smuggler's mouth set in a line so true it might have been carved. "You're alive," Davos said, when their eyes found one another. He did not ask a question with it. Men who had seen enough winter had learned which questions were only holes to fall into. "For the moment," Jon said. "And her." The bells were tolling. Their throats moved with the sound, so everything they said hung on it like meat on a hook. He found the lie in his mouth easier now. Perhaps that was the worst of it. How quickly the mind teaches the tongue. "Gone. She left the city to me. She won't return until it is quiet." Davos looked at him the way a man looks at a tide he does not trust. The smuggler had read Kings before. He could tell when a promise had been made to oneself to be broken gently. "Quiet," he said. "That'll be the day." He lifted his chin at the lines of women trudging by with bundles that had been houses. "Someone's got to keep food from turning into riots. I never thought I'd miss onions like I do. We'll gather what we can. Ships, stores in the other cities." Jon's mind sketched lines around a world he might yet hold together by force of thumb and will. There's a council. We need your voice on it." Davos made a sardonic sound that might have been a laugh if laughter could live here. "Be careful what you wish for. I've a voice that gets me trouble, especially when it says what it thinks." He squinted at Jon's face. "Do you know what you think?" Jon found the truth waiting in him like a sword asleep. He nodded. "I do." "Then 7 save us all," Davos said, and turned back to his buckets and his line and his men, and Jon went on. By the time the stars showed, half of them hidden by smoke, the city was a dark sea with islands of fire and the slowly moving lights of men. Jon ate when Davos pressed food at him and drank when someone shoved a skin into his hand and did not taste either. Near midnight, he went down into the keep's underbelly and into the cells and found Tyrion seated on the floor leaning against a wall, as if gravity had given him too many instructions at once. The dwarf looked up through hair matted with dust. The wreckage of a man who had thought his cleverness would be a raft through every storm and had discovered that water will find any hole. "Have you come to release me or to kill me?" the small man asked. "I confess, I'm in the mood for both." Jon knelt in front of the bars so their eyes were level. "Neither," he said. "Not yet. I came to ask for your words." "You had some of your own today," Tyrion said mildly. "They were short. That's their virtue. It is a northern thing, I think, to believe a sentence should be a knife, not a net." "Can you still make knives?" Jon asked. "You were her hand. I was her glove," Tyrion said. "When I advised mercy, she heard fear. When I advised caution, she heard treachery. When I advised victory, we got this." He gestured at the ceiling. Dust sifted down. "What would you like me to make knives for?" "For me." Jon let himself feel the shame of that. He held it like a small stone in the mouth until he learned its weight. "There's to be a council at dawn. We will not survive a war for the city now. We have to bind the realm." "Bind it to whom?" Tyrion asked. It was not sharp. It was bare. "To me." They looked at each other in the quiet that followed. And in that space was everything Jon had not said yet and everything Tyrion had guessed. The dwarf's mouth shaped a word that did not quite make it out. The name of a woman. and then he closed his eyes and leaned his head back against the stone as if he were measuring it for his skull. "Then you've decided," he said. "I have." The stone in Jon's mouth dissolved. "She's gone. The dragon took her. The throne is iron on the floor. The city is starving. The men with swords are looking for a story to obey. They'll have one. I won't let another butcher wear a crown here. I won't let another fire eat the world because men could not say yes to a right thing and no to an easy one." "And the right thing," Tyrion said, "is for a man who never wanted it to take a crown not made for him?" "It is now," Jon said. He forced himself to say the worst of it. "And I will do what it asks of me. I am a poor alchemist," Tyrion said. "I turn wine into wit and wit into ashes. But I can still count. Who stands with you?" "The North," Jon said. "The Vale if the North asks it. The Riverlands if there's breath left in Edmure. Storm's End. Gendry owes her and hates what he owes. The Reach is an empty bowl. Dorne will stand apart until it sees which way the heat is, and then it will put its hands out. And the Unsullied? I told Grey Worm will hold judgment. I told him to feed the city. He'll do it if it gives him a line to obey." "You told him," Tyrion said, "and let the syllables lie. You'll need more than that. He serves orders and memories. He'll smell both on you. And the Dothraki, they serve fire and fear. They serve who can feed them," Jon said, "or who can bring them ships, or who can promise them land." He hated the taste of that. "I'll feed them or I'll send them west with Yara and let the sea eat their boast. But first I need your tongue." Tyrion's eyes opened and were suddenly very clear. "I can speak a sentence that makes a hall sit up," he said softly. "And I can speak a sentence that makes a hall draw its knives. Be very sure which one you want. Make them sit up." Jon stood. "And then make them kneel." "Kings and chairs," Tyrion said. "I sometimes think the world invented one to get rid of the other." He held up his wrists toward the bars. "If you're making me speak tomorrow, it would be useful not to rattle while I do it." Jon looked at the lock. A steward slept nearby with keys as a pillow. He took the ring and opened the door and caught Tyrion's weight when the small man stood and the world tilted for him. "You're not free," Jon said. "You're useful. That's the kindest thing anyone said to me in a year," Tyrion answered, and managed a battered smile. "And if you break the habit of kindness again, it will be for the crown, I understand." Jon did not answer. He led Tyrion up into a night the bells still pricked and left him with Davos's men to wash and eat and sleep a little on planks of wood that had been a door that morning and would be a bed until someone needed the wood for a pyre. He lay down himself with his back to a wall and the smell of burned hair in his nose and closed his eyes. He slept because the body is stubborn. He dreamed nothing because the mind sometimes knows how to be kind. Dawn was a red smear with the grit of yesterday in it. The dragon pit's great bowl held 100 men and women and 1,000 judgments. They came in ragged lines and clumps, nobles with soot on their faces and their dogs dead, captains with their companies tattered, old lords carried in on makeshift litters, a boy in hawk feather cloak who had to be lord of something because he had inherited the look of a man who thought the world show. LD bow even if the world had burned. Sansa came with the veil and with a small hard shadow at her shoulder that was Arya refusing to be seen. Bran came with a chair and a push and eyes that never seemed to find any of this surprising. Samwell stood beside a man in ink-splashed gray and nervously smoothed the cloth over his belly. Gendry arrived in a leather coat a smith would have been proud of and stole glances at the smog-smudged sky, as if expecting the air to deliver judgments his arm could not. The bowl held them as a hand holds water, trembling, ready to spill. Jon stepped into the center of it with the cold narrowness in him, now a blade he could place where he wished. Tyrion walked at his side, clean enough to remind men he had once been a lord and dirty enough to remind them he was also a man. There was no throne. There was only ground and air and voices. Jon lifted his hand and the noise wavered and tearfully yielded. He stood where so many had stood to roar for dragons and blood and promised the crowd with their screams to use them. He had no dragon, only his mouth, and he made himself to speak like a man who knows he is seen. "The queen is gone," he said. The words fell onto the dust and disappeared. She left the city to us, to you and to me, to do what needs doing. She will not return until the city can bear what she made of it. There was a murmur that had teeth in it. He let it run around the circle and then let it tire. He turned so his voice moved with his body and met faces as if they had been knives and he needed their edges. If we argue about what we were and who had the right to burn whom and what a throne is made of, we will be arguing while children starve. If we wait for a dragon to tell us what to be, we will be nothing but ash waiting to happen. This city needs order. This realm needs peace. Without both, not one house has a place to stand. Peace, a voice said from the stands, biting it. And who breaks bread for peace? It was Grey Worm. His eyes found Jon and stayed. I do, Jon said, before anyone else could speak. I have ships coming with grain. I have men who will keep the peace in the streets. I have captains who know how to build a wall that won't fall if the wind looks at it crooked. I have a name that belongs to both dragon and wolf. I will use them all. We are to give you a crown because you found words to put next to each other, someone else said. The boy in feathers had the voice of a young lord certain of invulnerability because nothing had yet contradicted him. Forgive me if I'm not impressed. Tyrion stepped forward with a small bow that did not belong to anyone's house and belonged to the idea of houses itself. My lords, my ladies, he said, letting the words come out dry as autumn leaves. This is not a contest where clever men and boys take turns insulting each other until the one with better tailoring wins. I can insult with the best. I could certainly insult better those who think a young face is proof of a wise head. But I won't. I'll say this. A throne made of swords melted under a dragon's breath because it had earned it. The realm must not melt because there is no chair to hold it. He looked at Jon. If you want a chair, make one. If you want a ruler, choose one and give him a task and punish him if he fails. If you want to die quibbling over a word, save us the bread and do it quickly. Sansa's voice sliced softly near the front. You speak for a man who could not speak for himself when it mattered. Tyrion's face did not change, but his eyes, for a heartbeat, acknowledged that cut. Sometimes men are slow to imagine their own future because they have been told too many times by the world that they have none. Sansa looked at Jon. The wind shifted a strand of hair across her cheek. You told me once you did not want it, that it was not in you. He felt the truth of that like a tooth grown crooked in his mouth. I didn't, he said. I wanted other things. He forced himself to look into her eyes. Wanting's done me no good. The realm needs a king who will not love the chair but will sit on it anyway so no one worse does. I will be that, and I will not give the North away to someone who thinks it is something to own. He heard the twist, he had put it there. The North, Sansa said, and he could see the shape of what she was about to demand. We bled. We kept the faith. We were ruled from far away by men who used our lives to polish their pride. And would you have that again at Winterfell? He asked quietly. Her mouth closed like a book. I will not be a Southron king. I was born with ice in my lungs. What I say to you here with them watching is what I will do. The North will keep its laws. It will keep its gods. It will keep its right to judge its own. It will send to me only what is just to keep ships moving and roads mended and winter granaries filled. You will be warden of the North and you will not kneel. You will stand, but you will be part of this realm still. Sisters should not break from brothers because a chair in a city burned. He watched the compromise move through her like a small animal that wanted to bite and also to be warm. Arya's eyes, shadowing her, held a question that belonged to the point of a knife. Gendry spoke, awkwardly loud in the way of men who have learned that their voices can be heard and are surprised by it each time. What of Storm's End? He looked at his hands as if they still had soot on them. The Queen named me true, but the Queen is gone. Do my people starve while you speak, or do they eat if they say your name? They eat, Jon said, and you are Lord of Storm's End still. Gendry stared at him, as if weighing something on the scale of his gut. Then he nodded once. I'll listen. A hiss of voices rose and fell. The Lords of the Vale murmured to the boy in feathers. The Riverlands men murmured to each other that food had been promised, and it was hard to argue with bread when you were hungry. From the shadows by the broken stairs where the faith had once held spectacles of confession and blood, a few brown-robed men watched with the intent look of dry earth waiting for rain to make it green. Tyrion took a breath that the whole bowl seemed to hear. The realm has written too much of its history with fire. The choice before us is not between a perfect man and a monster. It is between a man who does not want to rule but will do it anyway, and the chaos of waiting for someone who wants it too much. I nominate Jon Snow, son of a brother who kept his vows and a woman who made one of her own that cost her everything. Call him what you want while you eat. Eat. Grey Worm's sword was so still it might have been another bone in his arm. He killed men who knelt, the commander said. He has been the cause of deaths, as all men who command have. But he will answer to someone, Jon said and turned to him. He will answer to you when you bring a charge and proof. He will answer to his council. He will answer to the people when they starve. He will answer to the North when it remembers that it does not forgive easily. Does anyone else here promise to hear as well as speak? He let the question sit on the dust until it had drawn enough thirst around it to matter. I will be judged, he said, but first I will rule. He expected someone to laugh. No one did. Sansa's face was a winter sky. Bran's gaze flickered over him and into something else and then back. Sam's hands rubbed his cloak between finger and thumb. Davos stared at him with a wordless curse he seemed to be saving for when no one was looking. The boy lord of the Vale lifted his chin and said that the Eyrie would not starve anyone who did not deserve it, and that he would support a king who remembered where real air tasted like. Edmure Tully cleared his throat and delivered himself of a speech about duty that sounded like 7 different speeches arguing with each other. And when he had tied them together into a noose, he held it out and offered it and told Jon he would support him if there were bread. Grey Worm's men did not move, but their eyes flicked, one by one, to their commander. A habit of obedience will eventually look for a place to sit down. Grey Worm looked at Jon and did not blink for a long time. There will be justice, he said at last. It was not assent, not exactly. It was a warning and a sentence and a promise to himself. And then it was an order to his men, and they moved. In the end, it was not a coronation, but a feeding. Not a ceremony, but a task. Men left with assignments and lists and lines of cards. Women found shovels and set about clearing streets. Messages flew like sparrows that had set their wings on fire and still had to fly. The city was a throat that had to learn how to swallow again. He had a circlet made from iron pulled out of the pool the dragon's breath had left. Gendry, who had grown up pounding metal until it remembered its new name, stood in the smithy that had survived with a hole blackened into its roof and hefted a hammer with a surprise that made Jon feel, for the first time in days, something like warmth. The boy looked at the puddle of iron, already gone dark and ugly. "You're sure about this?" he asked. "It's cursed. All crowns are," Jon said. "Better I know what I'm putting on." Gendry smiled without showing his teeth and set to work. Sparks flew. The ring he made was not pretty. It sat heavy in the hand and heavier on the head and drew the eye not because it wanted to but because weight always does. He studded it with nothing. He had him notch it in 2 places only, like a hunter marks a bow he trusts. He put it on because there were eyes waiting, because there were hands waiting for a sign to lift or to lay down the work they had chosen. Because he had decided and now he had to resemble his decision. The iron pressed on a thin scar at the edge of his hairline he had almost forgotten he had, a memory of something sharp, and he told himself that if it hurt, it was simply reminding him not to forget that everything a man wears eventually leaves a mark. Night found him at a table where a map lay under bricks, the corners curling in the damp, circles drawn in charcoal where grain carts could muster, lines like threads where ships could run. Tyrion dozed over a ledger, awake and asleep in the way of men who had used themselves up long before they stopped using. Davos came and went with numbers and insults for those numbers. A boy who had been sent to run messages slumped against a pillar and slept, mouth open, the soft snore of a child who had no one to tell him to close it. "You'll have to do worse things," Tyrion said without raising his head. "I know," Jon said. "You'll have to do worse things to good people. I know. You'll tell yourself you're measuring cost and necessity and that you're not enjoying the power, and you won't be, not exactly. Tyrion's eyes opened and were not drunk. But there will be a part of you that learns to breathe more easily when the choice is made. Be careful with that part. It is a tidy liar. Jon looked down at the map and saw how the river curled like a wrist. The part of me that wants is dead, he said. Then you'd better bury it someplace you can find it again if you need a human being, Tyrion said, and closed his eyes. He sent Grey Worm and 2 companies to seize the granaries of the harbor district. Not to burn them, not to demonstrate obedience with blood, but to keep them from black market knives. He met with Yara Greyjoy in a half-fallen hall where gulls made their sharp comments through the roof and told her that if her ship sailed under his flag to bring grain, she could have a slice of land on the western shore for her people to plant and fail to plant as they liked, and she looked at him. ND laughed in a way that said she had not expected prudence to sound like a bargain she would accept, and then she accepted it because food teaches even the sea lessons. He gave orders to rebuild the city watch with men from the Riverlands and the Vale and the Reach's remnants, because putting a sword in a hand is as good as finding out which way it will point, and better to have it pointed in than out. He made a council, Tyrion to count and cut, Davos to ship and scrape, Samwell brought into a room with books that had not burned and a face that begged forgiveness for the ones that had, to advise on what had been tried before and failed or worked only when the wind blew right. Brienne, who appeared in armor that had been polished with old cloth and new grief, to put a chessboard under the city and move pieces where they would do no harm to those who had not yet learned their names. Bronn to do for coin what crows do for carrion, which is to find it anywhere and in any condition. And Gendry, pride hidden under an awkwardness that did not diminish however many men called him Lord, to run hammers until they sang hope out of metal. Bronn, Jon said, you want something. I always do, Bronn replied cheerfully. It's all that's kept me alive this long. I wanted choice things when there were more of them, and now I'll settle for one big thing. Say it, Jon said, though he knew. The Reach, Bronn said, and watched him like a man who knows exactly which earth is unstable. Someone has to keep their fields sowed and their men in line. Besides, I like the sound of it. It reminds me of long arms. You'll make enemies, Jon said. I'll make coin, Bronn answered. Enemies can eat coin if they like. It's not nourishing, but it's satisfying. Jon waited because that was his duty now, and his duty was heavier than his honor had ever been. The Reach was a rich mouth and needed a sharp set of teeth to defend it. Bronn would be just and unjust in equal measure, but not cruel for the sake of cruelty. He would take his tax in jokes as well as gold. He nodded. The Reach. Bronn smiled like a man biting into an apple to see if it was bitter. A pleasure to serve the realm, he said, without a trace of shame. When the riot came, it came because men get hungry and because they had buried too many people to remember how to delay their grief. It started with a loaf of bread that belonged to a baker who had hidden it because hiding is sometimes the only talent a man is born with. A woman tore at his hand with her nails because her children's mouths were open in songless cries. A boy with a knife saw an opportunity and spoke the boy's language to it. When men ran, the city ran with them. It ran to the granaries and to the carts and to the men with coin. The watch lines wavered. Jon was on the wall when the first liaison brought the news like a bird with its feathers burned off and its eyes still bright from the heat. He went down into the square where the crowd already boiled and felt the dragon that lived in memory uncoil in the air. A heat of desire for someone to end it, to cut through it, to drop a hammer so heavy the noise would silence even children. He swallowed that desire and told himself what he would not become. He climbed the end of a cart and raised his hand. His voice carried, but not far enough. Rage eats words before they can feed anyone. He said, "Back. We will feed you." And it felt like a lie even as it was true, because truth in a hungry mouth tastes of ashes. Grey Worm's men moved in a square, shields in front, pikes bristling. He lifted a hand at them as well. "Hold," he said. "Do not cut them down. Hold." A stone took him low in the ribs. He grunted because pain insists on its own ritual. He put a hand to the place and took it away and looked at the blood, human, his and not a queen's. He held that hand up. "Enough," he said. and put anger in it because love would not reach them through their hunger. A bottle broke near his feet. Fire licked an ankle of ice. The crowd surged and fell back and surged again in the way the sea learns to eat rock. "Archers," Grey Worm said, the one word cold as a commandment. Jon shook his head. Another stone. If he gave the order to loose, men would die who did not deserve anything but bread. If he did not, the granaries would be taken and the gangs would be fed and become wolves. He heard Davos's voice in his head, low, mocking, wise. "You cannot feed a wolf until it decides it is a dog." "Loose over their heads," Jon said. "Make them duck, not die." Grey Worm did not argue. His hand moved and the line lifted and the arrows arced and fell like a lesson. The sound of 1,000 men ducking in fear is a kind of victory. The crowd jolted. The square of pikemen stepped forward, one measured pace, then another, and the pressure of bodies turned the mass into lines again. Hungry lines, angry lines, but lines that could be counted and fed and not a mouth of chaos. After, in the council room that had once held laughter and now held maps, Tyrion drank water as if it were wine and said, "You will be hated." "I am already," Jon said. "You will be loved precisely to the degree that the right people still starve," Tyrion continued. "And then you will be hated for that too." He found Arya in a corridor that had been carved into weird curves by heat, as if the stones had started to melt and remembered themselves just in time. She had a way of leaning against nothing that suggested a wall that had not yet been built. "Nice crown," she said, with her eyes not on the iron but on his mouth. "It's heavy," he answered. "They're all heavy," she said. "Then you stop noticing. That's when it owns you." He looked at her and at the way she did not fidget. "You'll leave," he said. "I will." She glanced toward the door. "There's nothing left here that needs what I see. Enidu." "I could need it," he said, and there was a shadow of a smile in that, bitter on his mouth. "You don't want me to be who you'd have to ask me to be," she said, softer than he'd expected. "You always hated shadows with knives. You wanted light to fix things." She looked past him, through the window to the smoking city. "Light messed this city up pretty well. Will you come back?" he asked. "When there's a reason," she said. She touched the edge of the iron as if to test it for sharpness. "Be careful with this. If you ever stop being careful, I'll hear of it." She smiled, and it did not show teeth. "You're king now, not my brother. You're more than that and less." He nodded. "Go west." She tilted her head, curious. "You knew." "I did," he said. "You never walked toward the thing other people wanted. You always wanted the place where the map was blank." She left with a crew he trusted because he had chosen them for her. Hard men who did not know what to make of the small thing with the knife and the eyes you did not look at twice if you wanted to sleep. He watched her ship run like a dark fingertip across water, and then he went back to his maps. He married because kings marry and because alliances that live in men's mouths die quickly unless they are given bodies. He married a woman from Dorne because Dorne had lived long apart and liked it that way, and because he needed a house that would not kneel but would stand when everyone else bent. She was a Dane cousin, dark eyes that had their own weather in them and a mouth that said the thing it meant. He liked her because she looked at him like a man and not a chair. She liked him because he told her the truth when there was no advantage in it. They made a child who looked like both of them and neither solemn as the moon. He named the boy Eamon because some names you borrow when you cannot bear to say the one you want. Sansa wrote from Winterfell with letters that were knives wrapped in words. She thanked him for letting her guard her own lands and told him she could not forgive him for refusing the North what he had given to others in softer guises. He wrote back with a hand that grew more careful as he went. He told her he would keep his promise to keep his hands off her laws and would keep his promise to ask for bread when he needed it and not to take a crumb more. He did not write the apology that lay under what he had done and left it to be understood or not. Bran looked at him in the godswood of the Red Keep under a tree that would never be a weirwood because this was not its country and said, "You are making the best choices you can," as if reading from a book about birds, and Jon wanted, for a moment that scared him in its honesty, to put a hand to the back of that thin white neck and snap it. The thought passed like a bird hitting glass. He breathed. He looked at the red leaves painted onto plaster and pretended. "Do you see how this ends?" He asked the boy who had been his brother and was now a door without a handle. "I see that endings are as many as crows," Bran said. "I see that the ones that are gentlest are the ones where men remember they will die." "Do you see me dying?" Jon asked. "Yes," Bran said, and did not smile or soften it. "I see everyone dying. That is not interesting. Do you see me dying with a sword in my hand?" He wanted to know because he wanted a small kindness. Bran looked at him the way winter looks at the last apples on a branch. "I see you dying with iron on your brow," he said. "And alone, except that no one is alone, not for long." "Then leave," Jon said, "because mercy comes in strange forms. Beyond the wall there's sky enough you can watch it as long as you like and never see it end. Here everything ends." Bran left with men who knew how to move in snow the way fish know how to move in water. He turned in the gate once and looked back over his shoulder with eyes that were not sad because sadness belongs to things that change. Jon raised a hand that he wasn't sure meant anything and then put it down. Grey Worm returned from Noth with scars that were not on his body. He bowed in a room where flowers had been painted on walls to convince men they were not underground and said, "My men are leaving, to go where they were loved," Jon said. He meant Missandei's island, where the wind smelled salt and sweet and where men had learned a different kind of discipline. "To go where they were promised," Grey Worm said. "Some will stay. They do not know what to do without orders." "Then give them mine," Jon said. Grey Worm looked at him for a long time and then nodded. "You gave me your word at the dragon pit," he said quietly. "I have watched you hold it like iron in your mouth. It is not what I wanted, but it is what you said." "I killed your queen," Jon said softly. He felt the floor tilt. "I did it because I had to. I have been killing her again in my head every night." Grey Worm's jaw worked. "You will never say that again," he said. "Not to anyone but me and not to me after today." "I won't," Jon said. "Then we are done," Grey Worm said. And the words had the shape of a blessing anyway. There were plots because there are always plots where chairs grow. A remnant of the Lannister household tried to cut him down at prayer in a chapel still perfumed with smoke. The knife never reached him because Brienne moved like lightning from a blue sky. A priest of the Seven gathered men in a cellar and told them the Dragon King had stolen their god's fire and that God wanted it back. Sam explained to him, with the patience of a man who has read books about fire, that gods manage perfectly well without men's help. And when that didn't work, Bronn explained to him with fewer words and more coin that the city meant to worship bread for a while. A Sellsword captain from Essos sent letters that promised 1,000 men and duty and honor, and what he wanted was to own the harbor. Davos brought him into a room with a single chair and told him to sit, and when the man sat, Davos kindly and carefully broke the chair and told him that some traps are made of soft wood and will break themselves if you are patient. In the 3rd year of his rule, spring visited in truth and not just in symbols. A white raven arrived, and the maesters made a ceremony of pretending it meant more than it did. Children were born enough that he could go to the naming feasts and feel that there would be more of those than there were funerals this year, and for a day that felt like a sentence turned right side up. He distributed land to men who had none and could build with their hands. He sent Rightminders to cities where the law had been a rumor and made it a fact. Sansa asked, again, for the independence of the North, and he refused her, again with gentleness sharp as glass. The letters grew colder and then stopped for a time. Arya did not write from the West, because the West was busy teaching her a language without paper. Bran sent a raven's feather in a box, which might have been a joke or a prophecy or a reminder that some gifts are the point more than themselves. On a day when the air had gone hot and slow, he stood on the balcony that looked over the yard where the boys trained with sticks and wooden swords and saw the shape in the sky and knew it for what it was. It moved with a grace that ignored gravity, as if gravity had been a story told to lesser things. It blackened the sun as it came. The yard became a dish of shadow. The boys forgot to breathe. Drogon hung there, everything that had not burned him away come back and made larger by distance. The dragon dipped and wheeled and came on and then flared to a stop with wings out, so the wind of them made papers fly in the room behind Jon, and looked at him as if this had all been a puzzle it had been trying to solve in the mountains. Men came running with crossbows and then stopped because their bodies still remembered what it meant to be prey. Jon held out empty hands because that had once been the right thing and might yet be. He felt the crown's iron cut a little deeper into skin swollen with summer. "I know," he said, in a voice that could not carry to an animal with fire in its throat. And yet words have a way of traveling they do not explain. "I know." The dragon opened its mouth, and for a second, while the world glowed at the edges, he thought it would end here. Iron melting on his brow, a very short line between decision and consequence. The dragon's tongue moved. The fire did not come. Drogon made a sound like grief and thunder having a child, and then rose and turned and flew away over the broken city and the sea beyond. Jon stood for a long time with his hands open and thought about mercy that cannot be earned. In the 5th year, a man in black leather with the smell of salt on him came to court with news from the Iron Islands that sounded like a threat and a proposal at the same time. In the 6th, a harvest failed in the riverlands because the river remembered it owned the fields when it rose and took them back. In the 8th, a summer plague crept along the keys and took men who had not yet learned the names of their own fears. In the 9th, his son fell and broke an arm climbing where he had been. Told not to climb and cried like a small doomed thing, and then showed him the way children do how quickly bodies learn to be new again. In the 10th year, he rode north when a lord decided that the space between promise and practice had grown too wide and gathered men to test which would win. Sansa rode south to meet him because she did not trust him to do what needed doing and not a thing more. They met on a fall day with the smell of apples rotting sweetly under their horses' feet. And he saw the set to her jaw and knew he would not convince her with anything but facts. He beat the rebellion because he had learned, to his shame and his utility, exactly how to measure lives against order. He took the Lord's sword and broke it in public and did not take his head because there had been enough heads taken in that land. He put the Lord in a cell and put the man's steward in his place with a letter in his pocket that would hang him if he did not read it every morning and remember. After, they sat together under a tree that threw them both back into their common youth, and she said with careful coldness, "I have learned to be what I needed to be." "So have I," he said. "You did not keep your promise to me," she said. "I kept the one I had to," he answered. "You made that one up without me," she said. "I did," he said. They had nothing to say to each other for a while then. The leaves clicked above them like small wooden tongues. He thought about saying the thing he had never said to her, the thing about the knife and the instant after and the dragon and the choice, and he did not say it because saying it would feed nothing. She looked at him, and he saw in her the line of a girl who had wanted songs to be true and had learned to sing new ones that had no tune and lived in the mouth like salt. "Is it worth it?" she asked at last, simple as water. He felt for an answer and found none that fit. "It is what I chose," he said. "That will have to be enough." "Not for me," she said, stood, and went away. And he watched her and did not call after her because he had forfeited that right when he put iron on his head for the sake of hands not his own. On the day when the letter arrived with Tyrion's neat hand and the words that said he had been found in a room with a flagon and a ledger and his heart had decided that numbers were too many to make friends with, Jon put his hands flat on the table and let the tears come because there are some losses that do not belong to the crown and do not are to iron. He took the candle in his fingers and burned the edge of the letter to watch the words curl away and kept the ashes in a cup the way some men keep rings. In the end, there was no war with the free cities because men who imagined themselves kings across the water understood that there was not enough fire in them to eat a realm that had learned a little about its own hunger. There was no second dragon, which is to say there were no men who had learned to keep their own fire in check, and no queen returned from the east carrying forgiveness in her hands. There was only a city that is always dying and learning to live, a river that overflowed and drew back and left silt for seed, a line of ships and a line of carts and a line of children learning numbers from coins and from meals. On a winter morning 15 years after he had told a hall full of men and women to let him rule or go find someone who would make them bleed to do it, he woke before dawn and lay for a while listening to the breath of his queen at his side and the breath of his son in the room beyond and the distant breath of a city too used to itself to notice it breathed. He rose. He dressed in quiet. He put the iron on his brow and felt its weight and did not resent it precisely. Habit is not the same as love and not the same as hatred. It is closer to bone. He walked through corridors in which he knew every draft. He touched the place on the wall where a memory had been painted too thick and then leaned against until it smudged. He stood in the God's wood that was not a God's wood and closed his eyes. He said the prayers he had always said and no others. He asked for nothing and offered nothing. He opened his eyes and saw a red leaf fall that had been glued to its twig years ago and smiled because the world remembers to lie even about small things. He went out onto the balcony and watched the light come on like a man in a tower putting shutters back one by one. He felt the pain in his chest before he understood what it meant. He put a hand to the place because that is what men do. He thought absurdly of a boy climbing where he had been told not to and learning how to fall. He thought of the weight on his head and of the knife in his hand and of a dragon taking someone away so carefully you might have thought carefulness had a future in it. He made it to the chair because he insisted. He sat. He breathed until it seemed useless to insist and then insisted again and then could not. His head slid forward and the iron slid with it and cut him again in the same old place and marked him properly at last. When they found him, he was bent like a man listening. There was a small smile in the corner of his mouth that made men who had not seen him smile in years feel a shock of missing. His queen came and took the crown off his head with hands that did not tremble, and she did not put it on anyone else's immediately because some tasks need silence around them to go into the world right. The realm he left was not peaceful because no realm is. It was not just because men are not, but it had a habit of getting up when it fell. It had learned that chairs are only chairs, and that food sometimes counts more than banners, and that a man can carry iron on his head and not believe in it and still do what must be done. The North had not become a country apart. It had not become a conquered province. It had become something in between that only brothers and sisters can endure. The river flowed as it always had. The dragon did not come again. The city rebuilt itself with hands and curses and laughter. Some nights, years later, in the houses of the small folk where songs come cheap and food sometimes shows up on the table like a miracle if the winter has not been greedy. Men told the story of a king who had not wanted it and took it anyway and did not do all the wrong things he could have done when it would have been easy, and left them with streets they could walk down and a roof that kept the worst of the rain off. In some tellings, he had been cruel. In others, he had been gentle. In the truest ones, he had been both and neither and above all tired. In the North, in a hall that had learned to keep its fires banked just right, a red-headed woman with eyes like clear ice would sometimes drink quietly after a long day and listen when someone sang about a crown of iron hammered out of a puddle of melted knives. And she would close her eyes and let the song pass through her and not hold it. And far to the west, where maps have to be imagined before they are drawn, a small ship once flared on the horizon and then was gone. And if there was a woman at its prow, she was not the sort to wave. The iron circlet lay on a table too long for one man, and a hand lifted it and set it down and lifted it and set it down as duties rippled outward. And the realm continued the business of being itself, arguing in marketplaces, burying and birthing, cutting wood and growing old. There were days of hunger and days of plenty, and both were counted honestly more often than not. The chair the dragon had melted never returned. They made a new one, plain wood smoothed by touch, comfortable enough that a man could sit in it for hours without bitterness, uncomfortable enough in the back that he never forgot to rise. And in the far north, beyond walls of any kind, crows flew low over snow full of the prince of things that had learned to live in cold. They passed over a small camp where a fire burned blue and steady, and an old man warmed his hands over it and lifted his face to watch them go, his eyes following until the black flecks became the sky. He smiled a little and said nothing, because some endings live better without words, and the crows flew and flew, and then, as always, they landed. They took him down from the chair because the body knows when to loosen its grip, even on iron, and because hands that had Leah rened every buckle and seam of him moved without needing orders. The crown left a crescent on his brow, old scar reopened, a rub of red, and when Illyria Dane, Illyria of the cadet line at High Hermitage, a Dane by blood and a wife by law and the brittle kindness of practice, lifted it away, she did it with the same care a mother gives a sleeping child when she slides a bit of bread from his loose hand. She laid the iron on the table and looked at it a long moment as if it might speak. Said nothing. Iron doesn't. Davos stood a little back, a man who had not been made for rooms where kings die but had found his way into them anyway, and he ran his hand once along his beard and swallowed and said nothing. Brienne went to her knees where duty is born more often than idols. Bronn was not there because Coin has better manners than grief and is more punctual. But he came later, and when he saw the iron and the man and the small smile at the corner of that hard mouth, he said, not unkindly, "Didn't think he had it in him to go quiet," and then looked ashamed and then let the shame pass like weather. Samwell, old enough to feel it in his bones and young enough that his body still believed in mending, touched the dead man's cheek with the back of his fingers and murmured words from the citadel that promised nothing but good intent. He sent a boy for the White Ravens, because ritual holds men together like straps around a barrel, and while he waited he thought of another Eamon and how the old blind man had smiled when he spoke of kings and love as if they were stories that could be told without spilling. The city woke to it like a man wakes to a pain he dreamed of all night and thought he could leave in dreams. Bells were rung because bells always are when men want to tell each other something is true. They told them slow and heavy, and the sound walked the streets into rooms not used to music and set itself down like a large patient animal. Somewhere in Flea Bottom, a woman cursed it and covered a baby's ears and then listened anyway, because that's what people do when told not to. Illyria stood at a window and watched the light labor into gold over roofs and scarred streets and felt, in that instant, nothing at all. Later the feeling would arrive. For now the body stood and the mind counted. She turned. "Where is Eamon?" she asked, and a steward answered with a title and a direction, and she walked. Eamon was 13 and had the solemnity of a man twice that and of a child. Both, depending on the hour. He had hair dark as ash wet with rain and eyes that could be winter or spring depending on whether you caught him before he remembered who was watching. He sat with a book open, thumb marking a line he would read again till it obeyed him. And when the queen came in he turned the way a boy turns when he thinks he is in trouble and hopes he is not. He saw her face and then his father's crown in her hands, and then the work that had been written into his bones before he knew his letters. "He's gone," he said, and it was not a question. The word carried more air than it needed because he had to make room inside himself for it. "He is," Illyria said. She sat beside him and put the iron in her lap. It was an ugly thing and it had always been, and now it was hers to keep safe as one keeps a dangerous tool out of a child's reach. "You will mourn him as his son," she said, and touched his cheek. "And the city will mourn him as king. And when it is done mourning, it will ask something of you." "It will ask for me," he said. He didn't make it cruel or triumphant. He sounded tired and a little frightened, and that was honesty. "It will ask for the best of you," she said. "You will give it what you can, and what you can't, I'll hold back from its hands." There was no coronation. Days are not crowns one can choose to wear. They fall on the head whether the head is ready or not. They kept the vigil first, because men have to sit with death long enough to recognize it. Northmen came down and watched the fires with faces that said winter and summer were merely words men put on whether to make conversation easier. Sansa stood with her hands in her sleeves and her hair neatly braided for war and sorrow both. And Arya was not there because she had gone to find the edge and had discovered that edges always move. Bran had already left long ago and taken with him the habit of giving answers that sounded like riddles even when they weren't. Gendry came, large hands held together like a prayer because he did not know what else to do with them. And Yara stood with her arms crossed and made no jokes, which was the loudest grief she knew. Tyrion was not there because he had gone into a quiet and did not return. But his absence sat in the room like a chair someone always used and left, and even Bronn passed his hand at the air where a snicker might have been. Grey Worm's letter came across the sea on a ship that had learned to live on that road and did not trust any other. The paper was stiff with salt. The words were spare. "I hear your bells. My men who stayed will stay until the grain is counted. Noth has its own work." He did not sign it with the name he had been given in Narthi. He signed it with a pressed thumbprint like a soldier's oath. Illyria read it and closed her eyes briefly. Sometimes a man's presence is most honest in what he refuses to promise. In the morning the council gathered, because habit is the gentlest tyrant. Davos took the head of the table without sitting at the throne end, because thrones make men foolhardy or afraid, and he wanted neither. Brienne stood because chairs never remembered she was made for iron and movement. Sam had a chain around his neck that chimed softly when he turned his head and reminded men that learning sounds like laundry sometimes. Bronn lounged with one ankle on the other knee and looked everywhere and nowhere.
J'endrissa.
T awkwardly, too big for courtesies, exactly right for hammers and honesty. Others came and went. The Lord of the Eyrie for a day and then a week, Edmure Tully with his sentences tied together like a bundle of sticks, the High Septon, who reminded anyone who listened that the gods had tolerated kings for a long time and would continue until they didn't. Illyria brought Aemon and set him at the far end with a lad's stool, and he did not fidget, which impressed men even more than speeches would have. "We do not pretend today," Davos said, opening the business with a voice that could cajole a reef out of hiding. "We do not pretend a boy can be what his father was before he needs to be. He has a mother for that, and he has us. So speak to me as you would speak to him, and let me be rude on his behalf if I must." The Iron Bank's note sat folded like a snake on the table. Bronn flicked it open because he liked snakes when they promise gold and not bite. "They send their condolences," he said, "and their reminder that a man's death does not kill his debts." "Kind of them," Davos said. "They do offer to extend terms," Sam put in, hunting for compassion in columns, "at a price that would make a man think the sun ought to pay rent for shining." "We'll pay," Illyria said, "but not with blood we can help. We'll open the granaries first. People who aren't starving don't riot. Most times." "Most," Brienne said dryly. "We'll pay with harvests and with the reach," Bronn said, his mouth joyous and cruel together, the way it always was when he smelled a deal. "My fields can carry it if the storm doesn't lean too hard." "You mean the fields you were given," Gendry said. There was no malice in it, only an iron worker's clarity. "Everything is given," Bronn said. "Even breath." He paused, softened just enough. "I'll carry them," he said. "I'll carry them because the city needs to eat, and because men who owe me do not starve well." Aemon watched the words move and land. He looked at his mother. She lifted her chin a fraction, which in their language meant, "Listen first." He did. They sent ravens. They sent coin where coin greased rather than corrupted. They sent men with sticks and measured patience to the docks to keep the men with knives from turning patience into hunger. The city, which had learned through a hard decade to live like a horse that has found its own stride, took the new weight and did not stumble. There were tears and there were curses, and somewhere beneath it there was gratitude that no one had the energy to name. The funeral took place not in a sept that had been rebuilt but in a yard where he had trained. They put wood under him the way northerners do, and the smoke rose straight for a long time and only at the top took wind. Ghost appeared because of course he did, as if out of mist, his coat more scars than fur now, eyes that winter kindles without banners. He stood a little way off and watched as the flame walked the lines of the wood and up into the man they had loved and argued with and obeyed and questioned. He did not howl. He did not need to. The sound was in the throat of every man there whether they let it out or not. When the ash cooled he walked through it, slow, testing heat with his pads, and lay where the heat was warming but not painful and let his breath slow. Someone wept then, and they did not hide it, not even Bronn, who wiped at his eye like it had grit and then cursed the wind. Aemon took a crumb of ash in his fingers and thumbed it across his brow where the iron had marked his father and did not speak. Illyria watched and said nothing because words are sometimes a theft from things that have no language of their own. After, they went about the business of answering days. The realm had been taught by a king to expect beds instead of battlefields, food instead of banners, and it did not forget. There were disputes with neighbors because neighbors are not weather. They have names and desired boundaries. In the Riverlands, a miller had his will moved upstream by a lord who thought his need greater. In the Vale, a road washed out and the men of the next valley demanded coin from anyone who wanted to pass. In Dorne, men argued quietly about whether a Dane had any business wearing iron from the capital, and then remembered their own sins loudly and poured wine over them. Illyria wrote letters that cut like silk. Aemon wrote ones that tried to be other things and succeeded at being their own practice. When the city demanded a king to look at, to throw curses and praise at as a conscience for their discontent and their gratitude, they gave it a boy in a plain cloak who stood on a balcony and listened and did not flinch. They did not give it his head, they gave it his presence. Men judged him by the way he held his shoulders in that weather of voices, and the judgment, for a while, was not unfair. Brienne took him out with the lads some afternoons and put a wooden sword in his hand and made him remember he had a body. He was awkward, he improved. She tied his hair back with her own hands, businesslike, and made him look her in the eye when he lost and say, "Again." She sought in him for that piece of steel she had learned the older man had carried like a lodged wound. She found something more flexible, and she was annoyed for a time and then learned to be satisfied. Kingdoms can be girded with reed as well as oak if you weave them right. Sam told him stories at dinner, not about dragons or singers, though there were some of those too, when the boy looked like he needed them. He told him of kings who had stayed up 2 nights measuring how much grain a field would yield if the spring came early and how much they would grow if it didn't, and of princes who had become good men because they'd listened when someone said, "You're wrong," and felt gratitude instead of rage. He told him of Lord Snow, a slip he made to Lybe. Rightly now and then when speaking of the dead king, how he had hated the chair he had occupied and had done it anyway, and Aemon would sit very still and eat and imagine that kind of courage and try on its weight like a coat. Davos took him to the docks. He made him talk to men who had never seen the inside of a hall that clean and didn't want to. He took him to the counting house and showed him that ink could be a weapon. He took him to a ship readying to sail for White Harbor and had him help haul a line until his hands blistered and then shrug when the boy showed him his palms. "Everyone bleeds," Davos said, and Aemon laughed, a sudden boy's sound, and the old smuggler closed his eyes briefly, thanking any god who would listen that there was still that in him. Sansa sent down a lady from Winterfell to sit the city with eyes like ice and a courtesy that could make men mistake iron for velvet. She sat on the council without speaking for 2 weeks and then spoke, and people listened because silence had made coins heavy. "You will be tempted to make everyone happy," she told Illyria one evening when the men had gone and the wine had been watered for sense. "You cannot. Better you make the most unhappy the ones who can recover from it." Illyria smiled in the way of women who have learned they need someone else's honesty to sharpen their own, and wrote back a letter that offered the North more than it asked and would have been an insult if spoken by a man. Spoken by her, it was what men called grace. From the Iron Islands came a letter from Yara that began, "I am still not dead," and ended, "I expect to be for some time," and in between spoke of a storm that had eaten 3 of her boats and how she had sworn at it until it gave them back a mast and a man, and how men who had grown up with knives in their teeth can learn to plant if given a piece of shore and a woman with a louder voice than theirs. The same letter invited Aemon to come see what the end of the world looked like in a gale, and though he dreamed of it and of the taste of salt on teeth that cannot be brushed away, he did not go. He would someday. Not yet. The High Septon came in gold and white and said, with hands steepled, that the Faith was very sorry the king had died, and would be there to help the boy choose a wife when he had finished being a boy, and Illyria put her hand on her son's shoulder and said gently, "When I am finished being a mother," and the man laughed as if he had intended to be chastened. He went away after and wrote letters to fundamentalists in the city who believed sanctity was a nail to hammer into other men's bones, and told them they were tiresome and very close to heresy. The murders that sometimes follow those letters did not, which meant men were tired of certain kinds of blood, and that Illyria had eyes where eyes were needed. Bran sent a raven once in 3 years. A single feather nodded to a strip of bark, and on the bark was burned a shape that might have been a tree or a map or the back of a hand. Aemon stared at it for a long time and then set it in a box with his father's ring he'd been given and a tooth a fisher had claimed had come from a sea dragon. He took the ring out sometimes and wore it on a cord and felt its weight and did not say to himself what that meant. And then the East sent a rumor, because the East always does. Dragons breed rumors whether they breed dragons or not. A ship out of Volantis spoke of a thing seen high as God's thought, black and beautiful, passing over a southern sea with a hiss like rain. Another ship out of Lys spoke of fires in an empty place at the end of a desert and shapes moving in it that did not belong to wind. A third spoke of nothing and carried men with salt on their faces and quiet in their eyes, those who do not talk because they know talking invites questions their own mouths cannot answer. The letters piled. They sat on the table and Aemon stared at them the way boys stare at tinder they want to strike and know they shouldn't. "If there are eggs," Sam said very softly, as if speaking to an animal he did not want to spook, "we do not teach men to burn each other with them." "If there is an egg," Davos said. The Iron Bank will want to lend us the money to hatch it. If there is an egg, Bronn said, lively, there will be 9 men for it, and only 1 egg. If there is an egg, Illyria said, and looked at her son. It doesn't change dinner. We still need bread tonight. Aemon went to bed and dreamed of heat. In the dream, he walked down a corridor of black stone and came to a room where iron had been melted once and was now set again in queer shapes, and a dragon's eye like a lamp watched him from above. It was not a nightmare, and it was not a promise. He woke to morning and the press of rooms and thought of ships. He sailed. Illyria did not forbid it because she knew that forbidding is a coat boy's shrug off and throw at a puddle for mischief. She made him take Davos and Brienne and a set of men whose spears did not look like ornament. She made him take a sailor's star from Starfall, a stone that had been blessed by men who loved the night and knew how to read it. She kissed his brow when he mounted the gangplank and said, "Remember, you are not only yourself." And he nodded, and then grinned in a way she had not seen since he was 7 and had stolen a jam tart and presented himself to the kitchen in confession with sugar on his lip. Davos had the ship put to sea like a man introducing 2 stubborn mules. The wind took them. Salt filled all their cuts. Days on a deck teach things about men the land never will, and Aemon learned how to make a knot that would not betray the hand that had tied it in rain. How to look at a cloud and tell whether it wanted to speak to him. How to keep his balance when the world forgets it is supposed to be stable. At night, he and Davos and Brienne sat under a sky that made. The city stones seemed like a lie and drank watered wine and told stories. Davos's were funny, Brienne's were not. Aemon's were about what he would do and then turned, as the night wore on, into the smaller, better stories of what he had done that day. Kept a man from falling, learned a word in Braavosi, held a rope until his hands burned and did not let go. They came to Pentos and found its prince pretending to be less important than he was, and they sat in a room with pillows like women and wine that tasted like rose petals and tiredness, and were told about a man who had a shard of a horn that had once belonged to a dragon binder. "The horn is ash now," the man said. "But ash remembers fire." Davos watched the man's hands, not his mouth, and the hands told him that the horn had been broken on purpose and that this story was designed to make someone feel that they could fix it if they were the kind of man who could fix anything. Aemon listened and learned that flattery and fear have the same taste. He smiled and said, "If that's true, then ash will gladly teach itself to horns, and we need not train." The man laughed too quickly and pressed a box upon them as they left. Inside was a jewel that had more glass than truth in it, and an invitation to come back alone. In Volantis they found a temple painted in red so fierce it made eyes ache, and a woman whose hair was white reflected, and whose gaze weighed more than it should if eyes were only water and color. She told Aemon his name meant oath, and that he would break 3 oaths and make one and live. "That's 4, he said, like a schoolboy, and she smiled as if she had expected a man to tell her she could not count and was glad to be disappointed. "I am a poor accountant," she said, and then looked at him long enough that Brienne's hand went to her sword without thinking. And then she nodded at the sword as if it had bowed to her and went away as if she had been invited to supper elsewhere. In Meereen they walked streets that had learned what it is to be liberated, which is to say what it is to acquire new chains quieter than the old ones. They sat with men who called Daenerys Cal, Mysa, and Curse, often in the same breath. They heard of a black shadow passing at dawn far out to sea on a day the wind carried the smell of lightning. They heard of white bones found in a canyon in a line like beads, and of a cave where the air pressed like a hand. They heard, in short, what men always hear when looking for things that help them feel like their fathers. That the world is bigger than their fear of it and smaller than their pride. They did not find a dragon. They found only a piece of black scale a boy said he had pulled from a rock where it stuck like a thorn, and Davos touched it and said, "Maybe," and Brienne touched it and said nothing, and Aemon touched it and felt nothing at all, which scared him for a full afternoon, and then he slept and woke and was not scared anymore. In a port of little fame he went ashore for air and saw, across a square, a girl sitting on a step with her legs drawn up, watching a game of tiles played by old men with hands that had not forgotten anything. She had brown hair badly cut and a mouth set permanently in the shape of refusing. When she stood it was with a grace that said she could move without being seen and be seen without being shot. She did not look at him. She stared pointedly at the men's hands, and when a thief snatched a purse at the edge of the market she did not turn her head. But the thief fell anyway and lay with a knife pulled nearly as fast as his blood. Later, over fish that looked unfortunately like fish, Davos said, "You saw her. The way men in songs say, 'You saw a ghost.' I saw someone," Eamon said. "Then you saw her," Davos answered, and did not explain further. He did not call out to Arya when he saw her shadow move, if it was her. He did not run down a lane calling to a girl who had taught herself to be what the world needed when it needed it, and not when he did. He sat one more day in that city and walked its cheap avenues and put his hand on a wall that had been built by the same animal and men who had built all walls everywhere and felt the shared heat. He thought, "She is alive." That was enough and almost too much. They returned with stories and the weight of not finding what they had not quite been looking for. The city received them with a storm that had waited until the hour when men are the most tired to remember it had left something outside. The rain hammered the roofs like a debt collector. Eamon came across the yard in it and laughed and did not wipe his eyes. Illyria met him with a towel and a line of information that never ended and said, "You are safe," and let herself press her forehead to his for a single heartbeat. Then she set the towel aside and spoke to him of the grain levy and of the complaint lodged by the cobblers about the cut dictated by the Tanners' Guild. And he laughed and went to work. Time does what it does. It ran like a horse that knows exactly where the turnings are. Eamon grew taller and then stopped growing taller and began to grow deeper where men do when their faces learn lines from the work behind them. He rode north and stood with Sansa and saw the way the sky there had learned to sit on fields like a friend's arm and thought, not for the first time, that there are kingdoms that no crown can understand. He went down the White Knife in a boat built to withstand ice and learned how to walk without breaking his neck on stone stairs men had not bothered to make even because winters taught you not to be fussy. He rode to Old Town and stood beneath the high tower and felt uncomfortable because old learning makes a man feel like a boy again whether he wants it or not. Sam walked beside him and told him stories of candles that burned blue in doors that had been shut for 1,000 years and sometimes opened when a certain bell was rung. In King's Landing he sat judgments that were as petty as they were important. He sent a man to be flogged because he had stolen a loaf of bread from a lady who had hidden her loaves, and then sent the lady to clean gutters with the same men he had flogged, and made them work together until they were too tired to hate one another. He had men laughed out of his hall when they tried to make a wall between the river and the poor, and he signed papers that made men frown when they saw how much of their coin the crown had borrowed and how much it intended to pay back and why. He fell in love because boys do, and then held love the way a man does when it is no longer a trick of blood but a choice with meals attached. He married a girl of the Reach, not to make Bronn happy, but because he was surprised by joy in a room where wine was poured and she had laughed at him exactly once and then not again, because she wanted to see what it took to earn the second. And when he learned, he did not ask if it had been worth it. He simply celebrated that the second laugh had arrived at all. Illyria approved in her fashion. She looked at the girl very hard and then offered her a knife with a blade the length of a woman's palm. "Get used to the weight," she said and smiled. One summer the Dothraki came west again, a remnant with new boys in their saddles and old boasts in their mouths. They rode up the Green Fork and took 3 villages and cut them down because that was the language they spoke. Eamon rode with 10 companies and sat on a rock and watched them camp at a ford that felt too low in the bed. He waited until the moon rose and then had men open the sluice gates on an old dike upstream. Gates that had not obeyed for years but remember their work when a man's hand tells them what to do. The river rose. It rose all at once and quietly and then with a shout. And when the Dothraki tried to ride through it, the horses, who do not send letters to gods to ask permission, simply refused and went swimming instead. Men in boats fetched men out like fish and put their knives to their throats and told them to lie still. In the morning Eamon walked among their fires and found a boy the age he had been when he first recognized that his father was a man and not a fable, and he crouched and said, in the common tongue that is no one's first language, "I am going to send you east with a piece of our bread and a map we drew for you. There is nothing for you here. There is nothing for me there. Sometimes that has to be enough." The boy had not learned how to pretend not to be grateful. He cried. Eamon stood and did not. He never hunted for Drogon. A few times the shape appeared at the edge of sky like a thought a man refuses to admit to himself, and men pointed and shouted and swore to each other later that their beards had singed in the heat from that far away. Eamon would go up to the tower and stand until his neck ached and then go back down, because dinner still had to be eaten and the watch changed and a letter answered from the Iron Bank that had the smugness of a cat. When a shepherd in the Stormlands lost 15 sheep to what he claimed were fire and teeth and sent a prayer on dirty paper to the king, Eamon sent him coin and a priest to read him stories at night because he had 5 children and a bad back. He wrote in the margin of the priest's instructions, "You tell him I believe him. It matters to be believed, even when one cannot bring his sheep back." He was not his father because men are not copies of other men to be held against the original and found wanting. He had learned the trick of being present without needing to be always obeyed. He smiled more. He laughed sometimes in public, and the city liked that because it told them the world was not always a thing that happened to them. He could be cruel. Every man who stays out of songs has that faculty, like a coin he keeps in a pocket. He tried not to spend it unless he had to. Illyria grew gray at the temples, and wise with the place's grief had lived in her and left. She learned to enjoy bread when it was warm and to accept that winter made bread that tasted of survival and not pleasure. She had a second child with a man who had not been king and had no desire to be anything but her delight for 1 year and her friend for 20. It was not a scandal because she did not let it be, and because the boy king had smiled and kissed the baby's head and called him cousin publicly and often, and people had wanted warmth more than gossip long enough to build habit. The man went away after the girl was weaned and did not write because some loves have the shape of a room without a door. Illyria was content that it had had a window and a bed and a table. She kept those furnishings in her memory with a domestic order that would have made a housewife proud. Sansa died in her own bed a dozen years after Jon. Hair a pale fire spread on her pillow. Fingers stained faintly with ink from a letter she had finished and sealed with the dire wolf and sent an hour before. The North learned of it by listening to the change in the wind and by reading ravens. The South learned it when men in identical cloaks came south in a quiet wedge and stood on the floor of the hall and took off their hoods and did not bow, which was the nearest thing the North does to grief in public. Eamon went north. He stood in the hall and looked at the empty chair and touched with the back of his fingers the carved wolf's head above it and said the prayers Sam had taught him for women who had carried more than their share. He sat with Arya. Yes, Arya, who had come back as if stepping from a shadow without explanation and no one expected one, on the ramparts and talked about ordinary things because sometimes that is the way to honor the dead. "She used to put her hands on my head when I wouldn't stop moving," Arya said, as if she could press stillness into me like oil into a latch. "Could she?" Eamon asked. Arya smiled like a crack letting light through. "Sometimes," she said, "when I let her. They hunted once badly. The deer knew too much and the snow made fools of even the best tracks. They returned to the hall cold and human and laughed at themselves in the way that says, 'We have survived enough to have earned this.'" Ghost patted in and pressed his head against Arya's hip, and she wobbled because he weighed years and entered a wolf's warmth the way a hand enters water. Eamon looked at the animal and felt, as he always did, that there was a bridge between men and the world and that it had pause. Down in the south a cult rose that said men born under a certain star could not be ruled by those born under another, because the sky takes sides, and Eamon had their leader brought in and fed and asked them to talk until they had nothing else to say, and then sent them to clean the privies in the city with a broom he gave them and told them to come back in a year and tell him if the stars had interfered with the bristles. Some men cannot be mocked away from their certainty. Some can. Enough were, this time. The Iron Bank forgave a debt once when Bronn died, because he had made them enough coin they could afford to show grace and keep men believing they were not a beast with only one appetite. They sent his bones back in a black box with a note that said, "He paid like a gentleman," and Illyria laughed a laugh sharp as a blade and said, "He would have hated that," and buried him under an apple tree in a garden where children would throw sticks and eat fruit and learn to lie about it. Sam outlived them all because some men learn the trick of living past the men they love and then doing it again. He wrote a book about a time in the world when a man who had not wanted a chair had sat in it until learning how to forget the weight and then remembering it on purpose every morning. He did not show it to the boy until the boy had grown and tired and lived through his first winter as king with a child in the nursery crying often enough to teach him the patience of curtains. When he gave it to Eamon, the man and not the boy, they sat together and watched the river move, and Sam said, "It will be read and misread and badly remembered and sung about by men who cannot carry a tune. That is how stories end and begin." Eamon turned the book over in his hands and did not open it. "Did you name him king?" he asked. "I named him man," Sam said. "The rest follows." "That's enough," Eamon murmured, and did not say for whom. Arya came and went, which is what she had been born to. She brought him a knife from a western island made of stone that cut like fire. She brought him a story from a city where men talked to fish for luck and for gossip. She brought him the sight of a mountain that opened and let out smoke like a god exhaling boredom. She did not bring him a dragon. He did not ask. Once she brought him only a seed from a tree that did not grow anywhere anyone could name, and he planted it in a pot and set it on a windowsill and forgot it. A year later, he noticed it had become a shoot, and he noticed again that men do not have to earn every kindness they are given. Years moved. The crown tarnished and was cleaned and tarnished again. The chairs wore new dents where hands had gripped them thinking. Children ran in the corridors and learned the tricks of skidding just at the right moment and stopping before the edge. Winter came like a lover tired of being kept waiting. Men built the fires higher. Women told stories with more blankets in them. Old soldiers counted their scars with the same seriousness with which they counted their breath. The city did not burn. The city did not starve. Sometimes, during storm, it sang in the way stone sings when wind asks it to remember its own shape. Eamon lay once in a fever and saw his father standing by the bed. Not in iron, not in furs, only in a shirt with crooked lace and an expression like apology. "I did wrong and right," the dead man said. Such an ordinary thing to say it made the fever blink. "I did what I had to and what I shouldn't. That is the story you inherit." Eamon wanted to say, "The story I have been writing has more bread in it and fewer swords." But he did not speak because he had learned that fever will steal any answer it is given and claim it as its own. He woke with his mother's hand cool on his head and the smell of broth, and the story that matters most had not changed. He was alive. Once, out on the Blackwater, when the moon was 3/4 and drunk and the air smelled like a forge that had been left unattended, a shadow passed and men looked up, and for a second there was that shape again, ancient as a sword's first thought. It wheeled out over the water and the ships tilted under a wind they could not name, and Eamon stood on the wall and watched. He lifted a hand because sometimes a man must do something foolish to remind himself he is not made only of caution. The shadow paused and dipped. The water steamed where it skimmed, and then it was gone, and all the men on the ramparts exhaled together the breath they had been holding in common. "Does he hate us?" the watch captain asked, a man who had seen enough to make him brave and careful in equal parts. Eamon thought about it and said, "I think he does not think of us at all. That is better than hate." He put his hand on the wall's cold stone and felt in it smooth a child's forehead, and the taste of the night was not bitter. When Illyria died, it was summer and outrageously bright, as if the sky had decided to be vulgar about its blue. She lay in a bed she had once called a truce, and then a throne, and then a chair, and finally a bed again, and she took her son's hand and said, "You did not become him, and you did. I am content." He laughed and said, because he had learned to hide his pain bay, "Jokes softer than arrows. Which will they write songs about?" She smiled at him and then laughed with him, and the laugh had the courage of a child running, and then she was gone, just as simple. They buried her where the little trees in that garden had grown into real shade, and Arya sat under them one afternoon and watched a child play and thought of the day she had been almost a child forever. The crown went on and off heads. Time skipped and lurched and smoothed and taught men to read it. The realm made laws and broke them. The Iron Bank sent letters written on better paper than most books. The faith reminded men that gods are patient. The mother smiled at women who remembered to be cruel in a way that corrected and not diminished. The warrior kept his place above mantelpieces. The stranger had his due, always without complaint. Eamon grew old enough to know the aches in his hand had names. He watched his son. He had a son and a daughter because he had loved well and not too much, practice a bow on a morning when the light made seeing easy, and he corrected his stance and did not call out when the boy did it wrong, because he wanted him to learn to correct himself. He sent a piece of money to a woman in a street he had walked as a boy because he remembered her voice and had discovered she was still alive. He signed no name to it because sometimes anonymity is not cowardice. It is art. He sat sometimes at night alone without ink and thought of an iron crown hammered out of a puddle of melted knives, and of a man who had once slid a blade into a woman because the world needed it and had spent 15 years apologizing with bread and walls and ships and quiet. He thought of how inheritance is a mess that men pretend is a ribbon. He thought he would take the mess again if asked. And he thought, happily, that he was not always going to be asked, that other hands would be ready when his weren't, that the city would breathe in and out as cities do. On a day of deep summer, a letter came from the west, from an island whose name was shaped like a cough, and in it was a single line: "The world goes on." It was not signed, but he knew the hand, which was to say he knew the absence of flourish, and he told no one, because this was a treasure that did not need to be spent. He folded it and carried it with him a while, and then set it in the box with the ring and the bark. The plant in the pot on his sill had grown into something that might one day be a tree. He watered it with a careless carefulness that revealed itself exactly for what it was. As the years leaned toward what men call too many, and which are never enough, he stood again on the balcony in the morning and watched the shutters of the city open and smelled bread and human ordinariness and river rot and lemon and piss and life, and thought, the realm is not a crown. It is this. It is the unglorious insistence of days. He went to his table and set his hands flat on it and felt the grooves other men had made with their nails and thought they could be read like lines on a palm, the future and the past there, if one squinted. He smiled. He went on. Far away, in a valley that had no name and needed none, in a cave whose mouth pointed at a sunrise that had been happening much longer than men had been speaking about it, there was a sound like a yawn. The hill shivered as if shaken by a heavy sleeper shifting position. A small crack opened where there had been none, and warm air pressed out as if something inside had remembered it had a throat. No one was there to see it. That is why it happened. The world keeps its promises best when we aren't watching. And if, years hence, a shepherd's grandson led a child to that place and found, among the old bones and the blackened stone, a thing that smelled of smoke and fear and hope, and set his hand upon it and felt it hot and cold in a way that did not fit either, and if the realm learned to breathe a little faster and then slower again, well, that would be a story for their days. Between now and then there was bread and work and sleep and rain, and a city that had learned, through the long practice of one man's stubbornness and another's learning and a woman's exacting tenderness, not to burn itself alive just because it could. On the wall, the crows still flew, black notes on a white page that the winter wrote and men read like music. Tormund Giantsbane told a joke that made a boy laugh so hard he spat stew, and no one scolded him for it. Ghost stood and watched the boy and then turned his head toward the south and listened to a sound no man could hear, and then put his muzzle down on his paws and closed his eyes. In King's Landing, in the thick of market morning, a woman bought a fish, a man hammered a shoe, a child learned what her name sounds like when called in anger and what it sounds like when called in love, and the river went on, as it does, slapping the stones with the voice of patience. The iron circlet, that ugly honest thing, sat where it had been left the night before, faintly tarnished, faintly proud. It would be lifted and set down many more times. It would outlive the hands that touched it, as iron has the habit of doing. But every time it rose, it would carry on its inner curve, faint, almost vanished, the old crescent scar left by a brow that had learned how to endure. A reminder or a benediction, depending on how you held it to the light. That is another thing men in that realm learned in those years. Where you stood mattered as much as what you looked at and how. And that is what they taught their children, as stories do, carefully, casually, constantly, until one day those children were the ones standing, looking out, ready to decide how to hold the world and with what kind of hands.